Hey, this is Jody Roundhouse, the Roundhouse Report. Please subscribe. Today is April 23rd. Happy Easter. Easter just happened. As always, I gotta keep these things away from me. I'll go beautiful man on this crap. Okay, the United States is using its Coast Guard to F with China. Okay? That's what this is about. To help counter China, U.S. turns to Coast Guard. And that's a picture of the ship, specifically. Does that look like a warship to you? No, it looks like like a yacht or something. It doesn't look like a warship. U.S. Coast Guard is not freaking camouflage. I don't see any guns on it. It looks innocuous as crap. This was written by Dan Lamoth with the Washington Post. Okay. First paragraph. As the U.S. Coast Guard cutter sailed through the East China Sea last month, Chinese vessels shadowed it on the high seas. Excuse me. It was a reminder to the Americans of where they were, in a strategic area a couple hundred miles away from China's shores. And we're talking about the South China Sea. If you've been following it at all, you just Google South China Sea 9-dash line, and then go to images, and you'll see that China is claiming a vast amount of territory as its sovereign waters. It's huge. 1/3 of the world's trade goes through those waters every year, and it's strategically vital. They've already taken it. It's a fait accompli. They've built the islands, the fake islands, throughout. It's not just the Spratlys. They peppered the whole South China Sea. It's so huge. Google a 9-dash line, and you'll see what I'm talking about. They're saying if any ship enters this massive, like millions of square nautical miles of territory, millions to my understanding, it extends 600 to 900 miles off of China's coast. Okay, it's typically 12 miles is your territory. They're saying like 900 miles off our coast. 1/3 of the world's trade goes through it. The United States has been doing freedom of navigation exercises. President Obama was against it. He went against the military. Harris was the admiral of the fleet based in Japan at the time. Harris wanted to do Admiral Harris, and Obama was like, nah. But then I guess public, pressure got to him, whatever, and he ended up sending like one warship, like maybe like on like the fringe of the South China Sea. Obama was a pussy. But under Trump, we're doing these freedom of navigation exercises all the time, and all of the freedom of navigation exercises. These are international waters. You're saying that they're not. We're going to prove to you that they are. And we're going to show the rest of the world that they can keep going through these freaking sea lanes with their ships, and that they will be protected by the United States Navy, because we protect the freaking sea lanes. If it wasn't for us, it'd be someone else, or it would be just rampant piracy. And there are pirates, like off Somalia and stuff. But ever since we blasted them, sorry, I shook the table. They haven't been attacking American flagships. Isn't that weird? But anyhow, back to the Coast Guard's role. The Coast Guard, I always thought, was for the freaking coast of the United States. I didn't realize that we were using these. This is relatively new. I didn't realize we were using these they don't look like warships. Google United States Coast Guard cutter. It's a cutter, cutter. It's the type of ship it is. Look at those pictures. Go to the images. They don't look like they look like merchant ships or supply ships. I mean, they look like ship. And I'm going to get to what they actually are, though. From the article, the Coast Guard is increasingly orienting itself toward China. By deploying new cutters, repositioning older ones, and dispatching service members to countries such as Vietnam and Sri Lanka to help train those nations' coast guards. Now, we've been doing that for a while. The recent thing with Vietnam summit, with Vietnam is a big deal. The Vietnam War and how we're friends with Vietnam and stuff. It's because of China. They don't like each other, and they're having territorial disputes in the South China Sea because like 5 or 6 different countries claim parts of it because they fish. I guess they're some of these smaller, like Vietnam and stuff. I guess a big part of their economy is fishing. That's a big deal to them. And the same with the Philippines. So they each have claims to like certain little areas. China's like, F all you guys, we have all of it. And they're backing it up. You know, they've been doing aggressive stuff the Chinese have. But like I said, under Trump, under Obama, we hardly did anything. In fact, Obama allowed the island building to happen. Had Obama acted differently, the Chinese would not control the South China Sea now, because they do. They've put anti-ship missiles on those islands. They put military aircraft on those islands. Those are armed military islands that extend the potential power projection of China by literally 600 to 900 miles. That's a long distance. They just boosted their power projection level that much. Admiral Carl Schultz, he's the Coast Guard Commandant. He's like the top dude. He said that as the Defense Department shifts its focus to competing with Russia and China, the Navy is oversubscribed. You know, he says, you know, we can't do this. You know, we don't have enough ships. You know, and mentions the two destroyers that crashed, the loss of two Navy destroyers involved in deadly collisions in 2017. That didn't help things. People talk shit about our Navy all the time. Like, within our country, we're supposed to have like a 500 ship Navy or a 350 ship Navy or whatever. Okay, yeah, back in the day, maybe. Nowadays, when one ship can do the job of 10 ships, literally, if not more, why would you spend all that money and heap all that logistical complexities upon yourself when you can just have that one badass ship and then have a bunch of smaller ships that don't cost as much money and aren't as badass but can do the job, defend the bigger ship, the aircraft carrier. That's the capital ship. And then in concentric circles around the aircraft carrier, you have other ships to protect it, mainly from ship-killing missiles like the Chinese have, that are hypersonic, maneuverable. They go about 20 feet above the water. They're hard to detect. That's the kind of stuff we're working on. Otherwise, the age of the aircraft carrier is dead. Looking at the article. Basically, what we're doing, this is funny. Schultz said in a recent interview, again, Schultz is the commandant of the Coast Guard. He's the top dude. Excuse me. He said, quote, the Coast Guard brings some authorities below the threshold of war. The Coast Guard brings some authorities below the threshold of war. We are U.S. warships, but we look different, with a white hull and an orange stripe. You know what that is? That's gray zone warfare. If you've watched any of my other videos, especially regarding Russia, gray zone warfare that's with the technological breakthroughs and all that. You know, gray zone warfare. Also, the thinking behind it's pretty brilliant. Gray zone warfare is all about plausible deniability. Putin's Russia kind of spearheaded it in 2014, like officially, when the quote little green men invaded Crimea in Ukraine to seize Crimea. These guys were decked out like special operations guys. I mean, they had the masks on, so you can tell they were, but they were military. They were not tanks and crap. I mean, this is from the Russian military, like special operations forces. But there were no Russian flags on their uniforms. There was no Russian insignia anywhere on any of the vehicles or material, nothing. So Putin said that they're volunteers. These guys are volunteers. I don't have anything to do with this shit. They're volunteers. Okay. That's gray zone warfare. It's plausible deniability. Another example, again, Russia and Syria. The Russians tried us in Syria. Trump was elected. This was about a year ago under Mattis. Mattis was still the defense secretary then. And Mattis understands war. General Mad Dog Mattis, badass. It's too bad he left. The Russians sent about a 500-man mercenary. They were mercenaries, is what they call them. Putin likes to call them mercenaries, because that way they tried us in Syria, because we have like areas where Russia has its sphere of influence inside of Syria. It's mostly northwestern Syria. Ours is in the eastern part. Well, they crossed the Euphrates and they tried us, and we bombed the shit out of them. We killed about 200 Russian mercenaries, and we wounded about 250 more. And we devastated a whole bunch of their tanks and artillery pieces and stuff. We lit them up. We used, and we did this just to prove a point, because we could have only used one or two of these assets, and instead we used all this and we spent hours doing it. AC-130 gunships, armed drones, Reaper drones, AC-130 gunships, Reaper drones, B-52 bombers, freaking B-52 strategic bombers. Those can carry like 40 1,000-pound bombs. They just carpet bomb and they just cause earthquakes and they're devastating. So B-52s, F-15Es, an AC-130 gunship. For anyone who plays Call of Duty out there, you know all about the AC-130 gunship. We sent all that up into the air and we just blew the shit out of these quote mercenaries. And that allowed Putin to save face. He said, well, these weren't Russian troops. These were mercenaries. I have nothing to do with this. The Russian state has nothing to do with this. Well, they did. The Russian state tried our resolve inside of Syria. They got lit up. They backed up. We put them in a rout. Once they crossed back over the Euphrates, we stopped attacking them. And they haven't tried us since. Typically, when the Russians are, when they use force and then are greeted with force, as I've talked about in previous videos, they have always backed down. From Stalin onward, they've always backed down. Getting way off point, way off track. My videos are becoming too long, so I'm trying to do a little bit better here. Gray zone warfare, like what I just described, it's always been ascribed to Russia. Russia's gray zone warfare, because it also encompasses, social media disinformation campaigns, hacking, having, these fake front companies hack, and say it's not the Russian government, it's this company named Alexandria, or I don't know, whatever, That's gray zone warfare. And what we're doing with these cutters is gray zone warfare. Because instead of sending like a massive hulking, because these cutters are relatively small, they have a crew of like 24, 26 people. They're about 200 feet long. They have about 24 or so crew members. They're white. They're like bright white, and they have like orange stripes on them and shit. And they have like U.S. Coast Guard and big letters on the side of them. Whereas if you look at an actual warship, like a Guided Missile Destroyer, it's going to be all gray. It's going to be camoed properly for the ocean. It's going to be shielded up. It's going to have that stealthy look to it. You're going to see freaking guns sticking out of it. It's going to be like a freaking toothpicks with guns, and then under the deck, you have all the missiles that fly out. So I mean, it's a juggernaut, and you can tell it's a juggernaut. But when you see this freaking orange striped United States Coast Guard ship, it's a military ship. It's the United States military trying you. This would be China, because recently we used a United States Coast Guard cutter, went with a United States actual warship. Recently, this is just in March or in April. This was earlier in April, like a week or two ago. There was a U.S. Warship, I think a Guided Missile Destroyer, so a big warship, and then this cutter, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Bertholf. That's what it's called, Bertholf. You want to go? I don't know if you want to look at Wikipedia just to get an idea of what these things look like. I would just Google cutters, Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard cutters. Look at them. Look how unimposing they are. And yet they can cause a lot of damage. I'll get to that in just 1 second. So I take all these notes and stuff, and it throws me off. But that's our version of gray zone warfare. That large ship that we sent through the Taiwanese Strait, very strategically important. And we had this Coast Guard cutter like tagging along with it. So it's like instead of two giant warships, it was a warship and then another warship that did not look like a warship. So it's less imposed psychologically, you know what I mean? So the U.S. Coast Guard carrier Bertholf has officially been deployed to the Asia-Pacific region. Okay, it's like on deployment. And once it's off deployment, another one's going to take its place. So this is new. This is new crap, and this is all to counter China. Because these types of ships, these cutters, are meant for shallow waters. Think of invading an island. You need a lot of cutters to invade an island because of all the tides, and that's, as you build up to the island, the land goes high, the water goes lower and lower. You have to have ships that you can't send a freaking aircraft carrier through off a beach, or it'll be destroyed. It'll get grounded, But so that's why we need these. They're called littoral combat, Littoral, I believe. Littoral waters. It's just near. It's near shore. anything near shore. So whether it's an island, and I don't know much about the oceans, but the water's off in the geography in the waters around islands as opposed to land masses like China. I don't know, but any kind of island war, any kind of war that would take place with China would involve cutters to a great degree. The Coast Guard is growing their fleet of modern cutters. They recently introduced something called let's see here. This is all prepping for war with China, and we're doing it in a way that lends to plausible deniability. The cutter that we sent recently, that dock that looks so innocuous, that is a Cyclone class coastal patrol ship. I mean, typically these things are used to interdict like drugs and cocaine and stuff off of like Colombia, but now we're using them in a different role. These smaller ships, they're meant for varying levels of shallow water. Quote, they're meant for a quote shallow water environment, end quote. Whatever you want to take that to mean. It's freaking island warfare, amphibious assaults, and they also have the international authority because of the UN sanctions against North Korea, which again lends us credibility. The reason we have these ships over here is to interdict, these things with North Korea. The ship-to-ship transfers out in the middle of the East China, the East China Sea or whatever it's called, not the South China Sea, but the East China Sea. They've been doing interdiction missions where they're legally, under international law, because of the UN sanctions against North Korea, they're allowed to stop and board these ships with guns on, an armed boarding. They're allowed to do that. The new class that we are working on now is, the one that I just talked about, the Bertholf, the one that I just rambled about, is not the Cyclone class. The Cyclone class is our before. Now we have the Legend class. Because each type of ship has different class. Well, any kind of, aircraft or whatever, they have a class. You have, the different classes of aircraft carriers, different classes of submarines, different classes of cutters. Well, the Bertholf, again, looks like a cargo ship. The Bertholf is the first Legend class cruiser or cutter. Give you context. It looks like nothing, right? Okay. The Cyclone class coastal patrol ships, the ones that we still use, but they're being replaced by this new generation, the Legend class. The Cyclone class, they were armed with 2 MK-38 25mm machine guns, 4 50 caliber machine guns, 2 MK-19 40mm automatic grenade launchers, and 2 M60 machine guns. They're usually about between 1 and 200 feet, 300 feet long. Typical crew is 4 officers and like 24 crewmen. Like I said, it was the Bertholf was dispatched alongside an actual warship from the Navy in a high-profile freedom of navigation exercise in Taiwan Strait. But that's not the only time. It's been used other times as well because it's less threatening. And, it's a freaking if China were to take a video of it and use that to justify any kind of action, anybody looking at the video would be like, WTF, that's a cargo ship. What? Why are you threatened by that? You know what I mean? As opposed to like a giant warship. Big orange stripe on it. So anybody see like, that's not a freaking warship, but that's a giant day glow orange neon freaking stripe on it. They don't look like warships. Again, look at the picture. I didn't know about this until I read this article. Look up these pictures. Okay? Now the Legend class. Okay? This one that looks like nothing. That guy. That's the first of the new generation of cutters for the Coast Guard that is not defending the American coast they are still, but a dispatch has been sent now to Asia, okay? Under the guise of helping these smaller Asian countries that are poor, and they just so happen to be American allies like Vietnam and the Philippines and Sri Lanka and things like that. we're like giving them old cutters, and we're training alongside their militaries, and we're training alongside their own Coast Guard, and we're teaching them our stuff, and we're giving them our weapons and stuff. Where you know what I mean? So that's our. It's kind of like when that's our guys. China's like, what are you doing up in here with these? Like, well, we're helping out our allies that are poor and they can't afford this stuff, and their economy relies on fishing. So we're like teaching them different stuff. The Chinese are like, all right, we know that's not the real reason, but we can't. That sounds realistic. So that's called plausible deniability. It's the same thing in a few years ago, the THAAD missile launcher. I believe that's the acronym is THAAD, THAAD. The THAAD missile launcher. No one really knows exactly what it is, but apparently it's profoundly powerful, because when we put that thing in South Korea to counter any kind of, it shoots down missiles. That's one of the things it does. There's a lot of it jams stuff. It interferes with the sensors and targeting devices of enemy aircraft and stuff. It does a whole bunch of weird crap. It does a lot of surveillance. It doesn't just shoot down rockets. So China was really scared when we put that there. They were very scared to the point where they began to impose sanctions on South Korea. And I'm glad that he did not push out the president of South Korea, Moon, who has been called the Obama of South Korea. So I was like, no, don't pull it out, don't pull it out. Thankfully, he did not. So we have the THAAD there, and we have the THAAD in Guam. The fact that it scares China tells me, and the fact that there's not a whole, you don't know a whole lot about it. It scares the shit out of people, though. That tells me that it's a powerful weapon system. Ooh. Now, that piece of crap worship that I just showed you. Oh, excuse me, I have a sore throat. I'm sick. I'm all messed up. The bird hole, the worship I just showed you, that's the new one, right? Looks like crap. I really don't understand. I'm looking at the picture. There's rust on it. It's like there's like a yellow film of like grime on it. It looks like shit. In addition to looking just like a regular cargo ship, it looks like an old, beaten up, rusty cargo ship at that. You know what I mean? It looks like shit. And it's the brand new first of the Legend class cutters. It's just insane. They have top, so they look like they do, like crap. Yet they have top-notch, state-of-the-art jamming technology, surveillance capabilities, signal jamming capabilities, electronic warfare capabilities. And check this out. You think those are innocuous ships? Well, those cargo ships, or however they look, when it comes down to it, they have a number of decoy launchers to throw off any kind of incoming missiles. They have one MK-110 57mm gun. The A-10 ground attack aircraft, the Warthog, that has a 30mm cannon. It's a shell. It's about a foot long, a little bit longer than a foot long. That's a 30. This is 57mm. It has an MK-110 57mm gun. It has one 20mm Block 1B phalanx close-in weapons system. That's what it's based. It's based on the 20mm Block 1B is based on the phalanx, the quote phalanx close-in weapon system, end quote. It's basically a fast reaction. If something pops, these things roll up quickly. Again, in shallow waters, these things operate in shallow waters, and they can unleash their crap. Armaments I'm telling you about right now. So they're already tied into the point where they have the phalanx close-in weapons platform on these, Coast Guard ships. So we already see what's going on here. And China does. China does. It has 4 50 caliber machine guns. It has 2 M240B 7.62mm machine guns. It has some armor to it, not a whole lot. And it can carry aircraft. It can carry like 4 or 5 planes. So if it really came down to it, like helicopters, like 3 or 4 of them. So if it really came down to it, and you wanted like a fast reaction force to like hit an island really quickly, you could conceivably put a company, send 3 cutters in, and have a company of Marines on each. It would be a packed ship, but just launch them in there and just let loose quickly, as fast as possible, and then the rest of the fleet will catch up, and that's when the real heavy fighting will start. But if you can do a quick pinpoint strike and nip any kind of an enemy's attack in the bud, just bloop, That's what we're going to try to do. So this whole idea, this whole notion of using the Coast Guard against China, this is part of the, quote, Integrated Deepwater System Program, end quote. The Integrated Deepwater System Program that the United States is working on. Again, we are making great leaps and bounds under Trump. And I'm not just saying that because of political ideology or anything. We literally are, objectively, if you look at it. Just this Qatar thing, for instance. Now, I'm sure this has been in the works under Obama, I'm sure, but I think he was just kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. Trump is actively using it. He's actually using it. He's deploying them. He's using them. We're prepping for the war with China. I predict a war with China within 5 years. In 5 years or so, whether it's a 4-hour war, a 2-day war, or a 10-year freaking war, or a 5-year total war. I don't know. It could go nuclear. I don't know. And it may not happen at all, but I think it will within 5 to 10 years. Probably within 5. But it all depends on who's in the White House as to how we respond to it. If we have some pussy in the White House like Obama, we'll just capitulate and give them Hawaii. If we have someone like Trump in there, total war. Draft. All industrial plants are going to immediately be transferred over in a tank manufacturing facility. Game over, you know what I mean? That's why China, you know, they're being aggressive, but they're using gray zone warfare because they're using, you know, the historical ties. Historically, that's the South China Sea. It's called the South China Sea for a reason, because 1,600 years ago we controlled it. You see what I mean? So there, you know, it's all gray zone warfare. Like I said, Putin's little green men, Putin's mercenaries. By the way, Russia and China, both, and Iran, all have troops inside of Venezuela right now. I made a few videos about that if you want to check those out. China, Russia, Iran, they have troops. The Iranians are sending warships to Venezuela. The Russians already have heavy lift military aircraft and heavy strategic bombers inside of Venezuela, ready to go. The United States has troops inside of Colombia, ready to go. So it's not looking good. But I made a whole video about that. You can watch that. The Thad thing just makes me laugh how scared the Chinese got. As soon as it happened, they were like, South Korea, if you do this, we're going to light you up economically, because they're very close in proximity and they're very, very close economically. And any kind of war with China, like I said earlier, would be fought in littoral waters. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's not literal waters. It's spelled littoral waters. You know, it's shallow waters, you know, areas. Whether it's, you know, very shallow, very, very shallow, or not that shallow, but shallow enough to where a larger ship can get, you know, it varies. They have different types of these cutters. Some are 125 feet long, some are 400 feet long. It just depends. But generally speaking, they're between 200 and 300 feet long, and they only have a crew of like 24 people. So what's funny is the U.S., everyone talks about how we need more ships for the Navy, but we also, Trump has made this clear throughout his whole presidency and his the run-up to become a president, that he is not going to tell the enemy what we're doing in strategic terms. So Trump is he's adding much needed ships to the United States Navy, because we need these ships in order to fight a war with China. We need these types of ships. He's adding ships to the U.S. Navy without technically adding any ships to the U.S. Navy. So it's pretty funny. Island invasions, counter invasions, that's all about littoral waters. It's all about that. They have the authority to conduct armed boardings. There have been a couple with in the East China Sea with North Korea, where we've stopped them or boarded them. I don't know what our dudes are armed with, but trying to see if there's anything else that I forgot to mention. I haven't read any of my notes from this. I haven't read any of them, because I'm already pushing 30 minutes. Okay, it's 29 minutes. I'm gonna bust some shit out. The Bird Hole, this is from the article. The Bird Hole has carried out several missions that are typically assigned to the Pentagon, including a high-profile transit of the Taiwan Strait in March, alongside the USS Curtis Wilbur, a Navy destroyer. More recently, the Bird Hole made a port stop in Hong Kong. They rolled up in China. The ship has carried out sanctions enforcements in the East China Sea. The service has committed to the deployment later this year of another similar cutter, the Stratton, which will focus on training partner nations, because we're really trying to beef up our alliance system, regardless of what people say about Trump and our allies. Little tiny islands, Vietnam, well, obviously the bigger ones, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, but little ones, Vietnam, Cambodia, freaking Sri Lanka, Papua New Guinea. That we're trying to make them stronger. I'm over 30 minutes. No one's watching this at this